Alright, today we're talking about a major shift in the tech and financial world, because this is not just a CEO stepping down story. This is Apple, one of the biggest companies in the world, closing one chapter and stepping into another. Tim Cook is stepping down, John Ternus is stepping in, and I think it's really important to understand not just the headline but how the market is reacting, what people are saying online, and what this actually means for Apple going forward. Now look, Tim Cook was not just another CEO. When he took over after Steve Jobs, people were literally saying, Apple is done, this company won't be the same again. But under Tim Cook, Apple went from around $350 billion in market value to over $4 trillion. Revenue multiplied. Entire product ecosystems were built: Apple Watch, AirPods, Apple Pay, iCloud, Apple Music, Apple TV+. So let's be very clear, he didn't just maintain Apple, he turned it into a machine that prints money. But here's where it gets interesting. Because Tim Cook's era can actually be split into two phases. The first phase, investors loved it. Growth, stability, execution, everything worked. The second phase, people started saying, okay, we're making money, but Apple doesn't feel exciting anymore. And when you look at what people are saying online, you basically see two voices. One group says Tim Cook is one of the greatest CEOs ever. He scaled Apple, built an incredible operation, and made the company stable. The other group says, yes, but Apple has been playing it too safe. Especially in AI, they've been falling behind. And honestly, both of those views can be true at the same time, because financially, Apple has been extremely successful. But at the same time, in the AI era, the perception that Apple is not leading the conversation is very real. So what did the market do? The initial reaction was not panic, but yes, the stock pulled back slightly. Nothing dramatic, around 1% or a bit more in after hours, then partially recovered. So what does that tell me? The market is not saying this is a disaster, but it is saying, let's wait and see, and that's important, because this is where John Ternus comes in. Who is John Ternus really? Ternus is not an outsider. He's been at Apple since 2001. He worked on iPhone, iPad, Mac, Apple Watch, AirPods, basically the core hardware ecosystem. So Apple didn't bring in some external visionary to shake things up. They promoted someone from inside, and that sends a very clear signal. What people are saying, and I agree with this, is Apple didn't choose disruption. Apple chose continuity. And if I'm being honest, that makes sense. Apple right now does not want chaos. They want stable supply chains, predictable product cycles, investor confidence, operational consistency. They want to say we're still in control, but here's the real question. Is continuity enough? Because Apple's biggest problem right now is not operations, it's momentum, it's excitement, and most importantly, it's AI pressure. One of the biggest criticisms of Apple recently has been they are too slow in AI, and this isn't just media talk. If you look at discussions online, the same idea keeps coming back. Apple is powerful. Apple is profitable. Apple is massive. But when you compare it to Microsoft, Google, OpenAI partnerships, and the NVIDIA-driven ecosystem, Apple doesn't feel aggressive enough. So what does Ternus represent? This is where it gets interesting, because Ternus is not a showman CEO. He's a product-focused, engineering-driven leader. And at the same time, Apple also elevated Johnny Esrauji, the architect behind Apple's chip strategy. So the message becomes very clear. Apple's next chapter equals hardware plus chips plus on-device intelligence. Not hype, not loud AI announcements, but controlled, integrated technology. Now here's what people are hoping for. Some are saying, maybe with Ternus, Apple becomes more product-driven again, more bold, more aggressive in hardware. That hope exists. But at the same time, there's also skepticism, because Apple is no longer a small, fast-moving company. It's a nearly $4 trillion system, and at that scale, you don't change direction overnight. So I wouldn't expect a revolution. I would expect a shift in tone, more engineering focus, more product discipline, maybe a more natural integration of AI into devices, but not a sudden transformation. Now let's talk about Tim Cook staying on, because this part matters a lot. Cook is not leaving the company completely. He becomes executive chairman. That means government relationships, regulatory negotiations, supply chain diplomacy, investor trust. All of that stays connected to him, and that's a very smart move, because Apple doesn't want a hard break, they want a controlled transition. and that's probably one of the reasons the stock didn't drop aggressively. Now let's talk about sentiment. Some people see this as the end of an era because Tim Cook was the one who stabilized Apple after Steve Jobs. He turned chaos into structure. So especially from an investor perspective, he's seen as the perfect operator. But there are also more critical voices saying, yes, he optimized everything, but he didn't lead the AI era like a visionary. That's a harsh take, but it's not completely baseless. Because Apple's biggest weakness recently has been its AI positioning. So what does this change really mean? This is not just a leadership change. This is Apple answering a bigger question. What kind of company do we want to be in the next 5 years? A perfectly optimized giant? Or a company that leads the narrative again? John Ternus is going to define that answer. My personal take, short term, this creates a bit of pressure because Tim Cook was a massive trust figure. That's why the stock reacted slightly. But midterm, everything depends on the story Ternus builds. If he convinces the market that Apple is not late to AI, Apple is just doing it differently, then this transition could actually become positive. But if Apple continues to feel slow compared to competitors, then this change won't remove doubts. It will amplify them. Tim Cook built one of the most valuable companies in history. He scaled the money, but John Ternus might have a harder job. Because Cook grew the business, Ternus has to rebuild the story.